Welcome, everybody, for another webinar. Let us know in the chat where you're from, where you're listening in from. It's always nice to hear anybody who's out there. Today, I'm joined by Guy Podjarny, and we're going to talk about scaling out agents. What else is there in the industry right now to talk about? Guy, you want to do an intro about yourself? Whoever doesn't know you yet, of course.
Yeah, all good. I'm Guy Po. I am the CEO and founder of Tessel and founded Snyk beforehand, probably the kind of first line of the obituary at this point. And I've known Patrick since the DevOps days on it as one of the core pioneers of the DevOps movement.
Yes, and yeah, we met before, and I'm very passionate about DevOps still, but my new passion is as well like AI and kind of the impact on AI, both on the technology, as I usually do, and also on the organization. And I think that's a little bit of the topic today. We'll see on our first slide is kind of like we're actually bringing in all these coding agents into our kind of companies and what is actually changing about that. Let me see if that, like, my slides are up. Can you, like, Tom, maybe you can help us visualize that? Yeah, thank you for that. So we're thinking about this problem. Coding agents are everywhere. So Guy, what are the challenges that people have right now?
For sure. So we have, I think what you see today is that, first of all, the whole domain is massively moving fast on it. So when we talk about, patterns and people are doing it, they're still all nascent and they're all fast moving. But still what you see is there's been the rise of vibe coding and the understanding of how do you as an individual, first of all, like build successfully and then maybe scale a bit of your practices, but in terms of your own work. But a lot of challenges have come when you start to say, okay, how do I build a professional development kind of a workflow around this, right? How do I scale this to a team, to things that are long-lived? And I think there's a lot of many profiles and kind of ways to slice and dice it. But as I talk to a variety of organizations, big and small, that are trying to deal with it, I'd say the primary patterns revolve around the top three issues here on this slide, which are one is dealing with the fact that agents are non-deterministic. So when we think about software development that is repeatable, dealing with the fact that you will run a scan and find a vulnerability and then fix it and then run it and it doesn't get found and you don't know whether it was before because it was there or not, or you gave an instruction around upgrading a dependency or you gave an instruction around building a capability. It's very hard to think about this when it's non-deterministic. And so you have to build new muscles around this, understanding how to deal with statistical capabilities. And probably DevOps is like the best analogy that we have in this world of dealing with like creatures that sometimes behave and sometimes don't in the server side.
Production is non-deterministic, so we're so used to that.
Yeah. And I find myself saying like you can't optimize what you can't measure, which is a DevOps truism, right? It's kind of comes from there. So I'd say that's kind of one big bucket. A second big bucket, just for advance, is the fact that the software development revolves around intent, not around code. So they're basically new artifacts. Today's skills is all the rage, still very relevant. But there are these sort of artifacts, these markdown documents, these tools, these definitions. There are new assets that command the definition of the software factory, right? Of what produces software on it versus revolving around code, which when we were saying 2 years ago that code will become disposable, it sounded like heresy. And today I think it's increasingly accepted that is the destination that we're going. And then the last one I would say is this sort of, faster than ever path, which is also something we're used to from DevOps world, because, we saw how a bunch of mechanisms like gating and reviews that were the core of good software development in the world of waterfall development have become not fit for purpose in the world of DevOps. The same thing happens now at another order of magnitude or two in AI, which is you give the agent an instructions, you give them increasingly big delegations of tasks, and they run. And you don't have an opportunity to intervene or even notice when things go sideways. And so you need to automate and think about how do you interject that. So this sort of pace of change, which there's a little bit of a double meaning here, because there's a pace of change on the like how quickly the agent develops, but then there's also a pace of change of how you develop in all those systems. So I think those are the three primaries. Maybe I'll pause. I can talk about some secondaries, but we'd love to hear some of your views, Patrick.
I think a lot of companies struggle with, the first wave was like, get everybody Copilot. So, everybody was on there, like, and then everyone was waiting, like, hey, can I actually see the improvement, the ROI of kind of like giving everybody a tool? So, okay, it took us a while and maybe some hackathons and some training to indeed get to that intent. I think industry is moving towards prompt specs. That intent is definitely kind of like improving. The tools have drastically improved. The bump in November was kind of like, it's insanely better. And yet, like a lot of people struggle with this space. And that's kind of the challenge that like it is bringing. Like we see improvement, and on the other hand, we're kind of going for. Now, like a lot of people have opinions, like it will ultimately be auto-magically solve all the problems. So I'm going to try to make it concrete, and probably like the solution that within Tesla we're kind of very well working on. There's lots of things that we need to solve in the space, but the ones that we're really kind of working on is the context management piece there as well. And I would say, with my DevOps head on, context and providing people context, it was a very function of enablement within DevOps. Like we enablement kind of people to have the right insights, whether that like was early on the silo of dev and ops, and we didn't have the context of like where things were working on both sides, kind of bring that together. And right now we're moving more from kind of writing pieces, documentation, to kind of like providing this to agents as well. So can you speak a little bit to kind of the different stages that you kind of identified to work on that within an organization as well?
Yeah, for sure. So, I mean, context, it's funny how like these agents are increasingly anthropomorphized. I can never pronounce that on it. And you think about it, and so in many ways it's flawed, but in others it's actually pretty good to think that really what you're doing when you are doing agentic development is that you are managing AI labor, right? And so a lot of the analogies to how do you get the agents to behave the way you do, per your example, Patrick, on the DevOps side, a lot of that was around people. How do we get people empowered, give them the right context so they will make the right decisions? And I think with agents, a lot of it is quite similar in concept, which is, first of all, you have to decide what you want. And so a lot of this kind of learning by osmosis, and just this person has been in the company for a long time, and therefore they know what they are doing, and I trust their judgment. And so a lot of that goes away, and you have to actually write down and codify things. Again, probably sounds familiar for those passing the previous transformation. So you have to define and capture what do you want the agents to do. The second thing you have to do is evaluate. This is probably the newest bit because it's not that humans are predictable, but still we got some mechanisms around how do you course correct the humans. And because things are faster than ever and they keep changing, you don't have the opportunity to intervene when it goes sideways. It's hard to teach them live. You have to think about how do you know that those instructions you've given the agent are correct. So part of that is, again, you have to define what good looks like, what is correct behavior, not just what are your instructions, but what are your desired outcomes, similar to tests in software. And then you need to be able to run an AI evaluation on the with agents to be able to see, do they adhere to those. And we've seen that different models listen to the same words differently and behave differently. We see that you can phrase it better. You can see that emphasis is different, and just like with tests, you have to evolve your evaluation criteria. What is it that you test for? So you have to define what you have. You have to evaluate and make sure these are correct words. They're sort of well adhered to and applied by the models. Then you have a more technical communication / distribution phase of get the instructions to the agents, which, because everything is moving fast and all that, is not always quite simple. And so we have a registry over there. We're thinking about how to distribute that. It could be in your repo. There are many ways to get context to the agents, but you have to get there. And then lastly, all of these is a loop. You have to eventually observe what happened in the real world. And sometimes you're evaluating, a skill that you have defined. Says this is how you, whatever, should run a security review. I've got a bit of security in my head, but I can run a security review, and that's all good and well when you evaluate it on its own. But then when it's running on someone's laptop, it is running with 17 other instructions, and it's halfway through a context window of some elaborate task. And so does it actually load? When it doesn't load, what were the instructions that got the agent back on track? So you have to observe the running system so that you can feed that information back in. So I think those are, you have to define, evaluate, communicate or distribute. We alternate between the words, and then observe.
Yeah. I think that's also, a lot of people ask me for advice from, how do I bring this, how do I continue my journey of AI software engineering in my organization, CTOs, VP engineering. And it's like, well, a lot of people are putting prompts somewhere, right? Start capturing and kind of collecting those prompts, and you see people now, putting this in their Claude MD or somewhere in their repo, kind of collecting information, which is great. And then usually the second piece will be in the communicate distribute, that they're saying share this across, make this a reusable component, make this reusable kind of prompt or context for all the agents. So one team can reuse it in another team, or work from that. And then usually they say, well, how do we test this? How do we actually make sure that this is up to date? And this is the eval. This is, sometimes I compare it to, kind of the CI in the CI/CD. You need to actually have kind of that loop to see whether it's better or not, and that testing. And then the best test cases actually also come from the observe. And the observe could be as simple as a developer saying, I asked something to an agent, it doesn't work. Let me change the Claude MD or whatever agent MD, and then, let me do it again, and that it works. If you think about doing that in an organizational scale, you get way better kind of context on there. So that's why I kind of see this definitely as a growing point, on not only on the technical that we start collecting this, but you bring this in as a process. It's not working for you. Okay, let's see if you can fix it, and then somebody else can reuse it.
Yeah.
And final thing maybe on that is that this is great to get the skeptics on board. If they don't like what AI is doing, ask them actually to write the rules. Ask them to write, help the agents to become better. And so capturing that knowledge that is all in their head is such a great way of kind of getting started and making it more efficient in that.
I love that, and I think increasingly think of evals as the basically the transformation between vibing to engineering, right? If you're observing methodically and doing it, that's the replacement to the vibe sentiment in the team of, does it feel like it's working on it, right? When you're changing words and you run it a couple of times and it works on my machine, so you go and that's vibe coding, And I think evaluations and the ability to trade these with data is the distinction between kind of amateur and professional, if you will, right? Or or side project and kind of commercial foundation, right? So I've grown. I've become a big fan, and probably for me, coming from software world and all of that, probably the biggest learning and kind of appreciation to build coming into the space.
Yeah, it's funny. The word we know, in agentic coding, we know about vibe coding, but the word actually comes from evals and model checks, right? Whenever there was a new model that came out, people were saying we don't have tests yet. Let me do a vibe check, and that kind of got turned into, let's do a vibe coding. So the two are closely related to that. But I think in general, what you're conveying is put engineering rigor to that process, and not just pray and see if it works and go from there. So.
Yeah, precisely. And I'd say one quick thing, which is people are experiencing this now, because up until now they were just starting, and now they're starting to experience a V2. They're trying to use a different agent. They're trying to modify a skill or some piece of context. They're trying to doing it. So now you find yourself saying, if I'm going to change it, am I going to regress? Is something going to break? And more people in the team are starting to use it. So these needs are rising now.
Cool. okay, we got all that context. Everybody's working on this. What kind of context can people put in there? And like, how do you make it more effective within the organization?
Yeah, so this is probably the one that has sharpened the most for me in the last maybe month or two, which is most context types that you try to distribute within an organization boil down to these sort of three primary practices. One is policies and practices. This can be your security policy, it can be your architectural guideline, your API design, or your actual kind of visual design. It could be your commit messages, what would you want to review in a code review. This is all about like the practices and how do you develop here, what is good, the definition of good, correct, compliant. And so the source of truth here is a document. It's the words, it's the capturing of the intent and the decision into some document, and of course some evaluation scenario. You want to write that down, you want to evaluate it, you want to distribute that to the agents and observe what happened and keep iterating. The second bucket that is maybe the most prevalent is platform reuse. So this is, you have your user management system, your billing system, your APIs in your product, your infrastructure that is deployed on. There's no reason why the AI will know about it. I think we've matured past thinking that the agent will just every time figure it out by browsing kind of the code base and doing it. It is able to do it, but it makes mistakes, it's expensive, it's slow, and there's information that's not there. And so it's more about, take the source of truth here is the code, and with additional information of the platform or the system that is there. You want to generate documentation for it, agent-friendly documentation with code examples and properly, progressive disclosure kind of structure and such. Evaluate that it works, which is easier actually because it's software, so you can have some real-world examples. Distribute that to the agents, observe what happened, and then you want to make sure that you don't drift. So as the platform changes, the context has to get updated and get evaluated and not regress. So that's maybe the most common one, right? When we see like 11 Labs or DBT Labs or HashiCorp, the published skills on our platform, that's their focus, right? It's use my API as well, and it's especially important when your APIs change frequently, because I kind of glanced over it in the previous model, but models are always a little bit out of date, right? The training was 6 to 9 months ago, and so you're always a little bit behind. Then the third bucket is application context, and the goal there is I want the agent to work well in my repo. And what context that it need. And again, it can read the repo. If it's small enough, it doesn't need it. It can just figure it out. But once the repos get into most professional scale complexity, then you want to document it. And the source of truth here, or like the starting point here, is an eval, is to say, take a bunch of representative commits that represent what it's like to work in your repository. And we actually just released a feature today that talks about to help you kind of extract those commits, turn them into evaluation scenarios, run the eval, understand where are the gaps, what can the agent do, what can the agent not do. You do have to take some selection here, again, define what you want, which commits, which PRs represent working in your repo. And then once you know that works, then you can generate the relevant context, distribute that to the agent, observe and avoid drift. So those three use cases actually end up capturing pretty much all the types of context that people want. There's a little bit of stuff related to costs and kind of customer use cases or support. So these will expand, but right now I'd say these are the three dominating use cases for context.
Yeah, and I think it's great. It's about scaling out these practices. In a former job, I was VP engineering, and I had like loads of these docs, like please commit, do this, like that, please deploy, here's my run book, please that. Yeah. Like now it's almost like we can inline this, and my work was a lot of nagging, like, can we please do it like that? And now the agents are helping the devs like almost like intuitively do this as well. And I think the paradox was that, will people really write the context? Will people kind of, they hate it writing documentation, but what we're seeing is that actually they like writing context, because there is a selfish piece about, them developing, them improving the agent in order for them to do less work and to get better results. And that's a unique thing, is that we can drive people to actually keep it up to date, to drive documentation, which was something I've never thought would see in our lives.
Yeah. So. And the joke was that we didn't write documents for our fellow kind of teammates, but we we do for agents, but it's because the agents actually read them. There's an element of that. We know that's actually not always true. The agents don't always read them. You have to work on that as well.
Yeah.
But you're able to be a little bit more.
But I think it shows when there's an artifact that is being used very actively, you care about this, and that's what's happening. The more and more the agents come in, and it uses it, and that's more rewarding than the occasional person who looks in and then it get like quickly outdated. It is also the challenge, I think, in a company. We're keeping this a little bit up to date, because if you move fast, like AI does, kind of doing it. But agents can help there as well and see what is outdated. As you mentioned in the Observe, you can see what's happening, what they are missing, and kind of definitely kind of work from there. So.
Yeah, and it's a multiplication of what we wanted with DevOps, right? Infrastructure as code is a good analogy. It's easier to maybe SSH into the server and fix a thing, but if you want it to keep improving, then you have to automate it. Now it's true for your dev practice as well. You have to not just fix the problem that the agent has done, but think about how do you codify that into the system, and then with evaluations, make sure it actually works and it doesn't regress.
Yeah. Speaking of DevOps, right? We got a pipeline, not just on the dev laptop. There's different places where that context is reused. So it's not just the agents and all the developers working on it together, but there's the gates that typically happen as well, where all of this context can be reused there as well. Do you have any good examples about that?
Yeah, I mean, I think the best analogy to me is everything that a capable developer on your team needs to know, it is useful for all these different agents, right? So if your developers are also on call, and so they sometimes need the knowledge they have about the system when they're locally developing, sometimes when they're reviewing a person's PR, sometimes when they're deciding what to gate something when they're editing the build system, sometimes when they're reviewing an incident, trying to figure out what has happened, right? Sometimes when they're just observing the running system and trying to understand if it is a problem or not. And so all of those are potentially different agents that are running, but the idea of context management is that you build good context that explains the behaviors that you want, how your systems operate, what good looks like consistently, and then you can apply them in all these different places. And it actually extracts further out. You can have business information, you can have ops behaviors, like all of those things can come in and feed in. The primary counter here this is primarily pointing out to counter one anti-pattern, in my opinion, that is forming, which is aggregating them in one spot. So if you're just aggregating the context in your repo, it kind of gets lost, once you get past the local development. If you're just aggregating in your code review tool, then you can't use it elsewhere. So I guess our belief is that context should be something you own, right? So it's your manual, right, of how to operate, how to be a good coding agent or like software development agent in your organization and more. So you have to own it. You have to, and then you can technically integrate it into all the relevant spots.
Yeah, I think that also highlights the fact that even if you kind of own it as such, that distribution of the context, there's a piece that is about versioning, right? Like, is everybody up to date with the latest version? Because the more you share, the more it spreads out. You need a good mechanism to keep that up to date and kind of like make sure it's in sync. If I update my doc for a library, make sure that like whatever I put as a guideline is not outdated or in my kind of skills of things that I'm using. So there's definitely like similar to package management, I guess, and kind of versioning and pulling this through kind of the stages, that aspect of keeping it in sync. And I think the copy and paste over Slack isn't the right way to do this. And especially, as you say, you automate more in the pipeline, then it needs to be versioned, because otherwise you're kind of having challenges in that loop as well.
Yeah. And skills have been very helpful because they help nudge people towards thinking about this sort of unit of guidance as something that is externalized. So that's been great. Yeah.
So, it almost looks like the DevOps infinity loop. We got like generate, evaluate, distribute, communicate, you call that, observe. And then the whole loop is kind of like optimizing everything. Is there anything you want to call out that feels a little bit different in that world compared to the loop that we know for software?
I think first of all, I'd say like it is a development, and to me the primary message here is to not think about skills or context as a bunch of markdown files, but think of them as a unit of software that you are developing. And so when you think developing, you think about sort of the professional iteration of like building it, building on top of it, avoiding regression, seeing what happened in the real world, and etc. And then the second comment I say, like the biggest difference to me is that statistical behavior. So in some sense, I saw someone draw an analogy of every software engineer will be a data engineer. Don't know if that's precisely correct, but people that have dealt with operating big systems or with data pipelines are maybe a bit more familiar with the fact that this is statistical behavior. So you should build the system to be resilient to that. You should invest in indeed evals or like statistical tests. Because eventually, if you're going to train this workforce, this sort of AI workforce to run, and you optimize in other context for them, you have to build them. And maybe I will point out that maintain doesn't show up on the chart. It's maybe implicit, but the optimize and what you're observing is also changes, because the models of today and the models of 6 months ago are quite substantially different. And so, when the model changes, we've sort of seen, Opus to be a bit of a smarty pants, or a bit of a smart ass, sort of like not address very, very powerful, super capable, less adherent to instructions, right? While other models, might be less creative, but they're more adherent. So all of those also include maintenance. So it's very software-esque, but statistical.
Yeah. Well, some people have called that like context rot. And it's not only because the documentation itself gets outdated, because the world changes. Like your API might change, your model might change, your agent logic might change, like the way you do things around your company. So that's why I agree with you that it's like a living artifact that like needs that attention and version, and kind of like update, write the tests, make sure that like when I change some piece in maybe my guidelines, it's not conflicting with another piece, or it's not like guiding dual directions of codename convention or something. Like really, that is the burden. And I guess we had that in our code as well, but nobody was looking that hard to it. But right now, we will surface quite like easily when the agent take a different turn and wasn't.
Yeah. And even the models themselves, like they changed. Like saying always in uppercase has gone from being a best practice to being an anti-pattern in a very short window of time. Right?
Yeah. And having tests is also kind of we're talking a lot about context, and context is people wanting almost to write documentation. Bringing tests in to understand what the agent is doing is another good practice that people are putting in there as well.
100%.
So it wouldn't be right that we would just say this is the perfect world and this is where we're heading. We have challenges. It's not a solved problem, but what do you think is the biggest challenge that we're facing right now in that?
Yeah, I think as always, like the people behavior and the practices are harder to change than the technology. I think we are now on a mission of moving kind of humans out of the SDLC and into this sort of CDLC, or like context development lifecycle. And today what happens is the agents are working faster and faster and faster and faster. And still, even with AI assistants, humans are there reviewing the code, right? And that's a bottleneck, and that will also be true in operations. And like for the loop to continue and run at agent speed, the human has to move outside. And the management analogy works there as well, which is you can solve the problem for your team. You have to delegate and then empower and then train and equip them to be able to address and get the job done. And so we need to move the human activity, the human developer activity, to a layer that is above or below, whatever you want, or the sort of CDLC, and have it produce the context, quality context, well-developed context that gets delegated now, right, to the AI agents that operate at a variety of steps. This is just an example here for code review across the system. And I think that's the job of the new sort of software developer, right? I think that there's still a software developer, but that software, there's still a software development team, there's still professionalism, but the professionalism manifests in how well can you operate agents, and a lot of that is like how well can you guide them with context.
Yeah, kind of becoming a little bit more of a project manager across your agents. There is quite some narrative, the last couple of months on dark coding factories. I'm personally still a little bit skeptical, and maybe in a way that, like, yes, we can provide a lot of context, and it's going better, and it's yielding better results, and we have to interview less, but it's still non-deterministic by nature. So we need to be prepared. And I make the analogy with chaos engineering, like when DevOps got better, like, the pipeline worked most of the time. So we had to work more on like inducing failures so we could train a little bit like firemen and be ready. So I think that's a little bit of a paradox. Like, we're doing less ourselves, but like we're still responsible in the world. And there's also the risk appetite that we want to take. So that balancing is definitely still a challenge.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think the good news is that all of these things indeed supercharge us, right? And we're able to operate well and have all these side benefits. If you have evals, you're able to know whether some operations don't require the most expensive model, but you can run them with a cheap open model, right? If you are able to delegate more of the maintenance, you can spend more of your human time guiding the creation of the new thing. And so there's all these sort of good iterations. I think what we have to detach is this, well, we have to deal with the transitions. Like when there's constraints, we have to now make do with, don't fix the problem for them, enable them to fix it. And that can feel kind of frustrating and ungrateful, but that is the building of the muscle for tomorrow.
Great closing words. We're at time for the webinar. The video and everything will be available online. If you want to watch that again or share that with your colleagues. And why not kind of have a try with Tussle? It's part of the solution that we think is helpful, especially in the evals, the sharing, the registry, all those pieces as well. Yeah, see you on one of the next episodes, I guess. Thank you, Guy, for the good chat.
Yeah, thanks, Patrick, and thanks everybody for tuning in. Hope you try out Tussle, and just we'll add, keep the feedback coming. We're all kind of inventing this whole thing together. We believe and hope that our sort of products are sort of useful as you embed on this journey, and we're very, very hungry to get inputs and kind of help continue correcting and building. So, thank you.
Thank you.